Hello, my lovely anatomists and physiologists, Michele here, and we are starting our chapter 12 video series, which is all about the nervous system. And so let's remind ourselves about the job of the nervous system. So I always like to think of the job of the nervous system as communication. And I think it's super helpful to give it the adjective of like quick or rapid communication. And that's going to help us kind of set it apart from the endocrine system. And I'm just trying to move it over a little bit. Okay, when we talk about the nervous system and the job, that looks awful. I'm going fast instead. When we talk about the nervous system and its job, we can also talk about it as maintain homeostasis. And it does this, of course, through communication. Now, I like to use the description of communication because a good communicator is doing three things. They're collecting information. So they're listening, watching, collecting data about who they're speaking with or communicating with. And then they integrate that information with past experiences, past knowledge, either about this person or other other individuals, right? And then through that integration, developing an appropriate response for the situation. So the nervous system is doing all of those things. The nervous system is collecting data. The nervous system is processing and integrating that data. And then the nervous system is directing those responses. And then the fast part here is this is rapid fire. We're talking milliseconds sorts of processing and direction of response. Now, when we talk about the nervous system, we are going to divide it up into two major divisions. And these two divisions are divided based on the structures, so the anatomy, but also the physiology. So let's start by talking about the central nervous system, which is abbreviated CNS. So CNS is standing for Central Nervous System. And the central nervous system includes the brain and the spinal cord. The brain and the spinal cord. And when I think about the job of the central nervous system, I do think about it as integration, or what we can say processing information. And we can also talk about the CNS as directing the responses, meaning as soon as the integration and the processing is complete, an appropriate response is developed by the central nervous system. All of this signaling that's happening back and forth between the body and the central nervous system, and then the central nervous system and the body, is happening through this other division, which we abbreviate as the PNS. And so the PNS is standing for peripheral nervous system. Now, this particular division consists of both cranial and spinal nerves. So the nerve is the key structure organ that's part of the peripheral nervous system. The difference between a cranial and a spinal nerve is its origin. So it's either coming out of the brain and brain stem, or it's coming out of the spinal cord. Now, I would say then the job of the nerve and the peripheral nervous system is mostly transmission. Now, we will actually see that some processing does occur in the peripheral nervous system. We really pick up that more in anatomy and physiology part 2. So we'll talk more about that in the future. I think for us at this moment, it's fair to think about the peripheral nervous system as this system of fiber optic cables, right? So that's how we are transmitting, many of us, our internet, right? The data of the internet is traveling on these fiber optic cables. So these nerves are functioning in this way where we're collecting the data from the body and then it's being transmitted to the central nervous system for processing. Central nervous system processes, integrates, develops the response, and then that response has to travel out the central nervous system on the nerve to the possible effector tissue. When we talk about the nervous system, we will see the smallest functional unit is the neuron. So this is the cell that's going to be involved in the communication. Now we're going to have video talking more about these cells in particular. Right here, we can start by naming just a few structures, just real briefly. So we'll see we have what's called the soma. Soma is another term for cell body. The soma or cell body we'll see contains the nucleus and the other organelles. And then we have extensions. So we have what's called a dendrite. And then we have what's called an axon. So dendrites receive information. So sometimes I like to maybe do like a little arrow coming in to the cell body. There's not really an arrow there, right? That's just kind of for fun to help me. And then the axon is going to take information away from the cell body. So maybe add a little arrow there to help see that directionality of movement. Or maybe put your arrows to the side. You can do that too, right? We've already talked about synaptic knobs in chapter 10. So I'm going to go ahead and label that. We'll have a whole video just talking about the neurons. So we're going to get a little bit more detailed, or a lot more detailed in the future. Okay. When we talk about the central nervous system, we mentioned that this includes your brain and your spinal cord, but we have some other important pieces of information to grab here. So going back to our neuron, when we talk about the soma here, I would think about processing. And when I talk about the axon, that's where I would think about like transmission. So our next piece of information is looking at in the central nervous system, when you have a nucleus, we describe this as a collection of neuron cell bodies. And so you should consider this to be like a processing center. And then we also have in the central nervous system what are called tracts. And tracts are going to be bundles of axons. And the axon is that transmitting part of the neuron. So you should consider this to be an area of transmission. An area of transmission. We have different terms when we talk about the peripheral nervous system. In the peripheral nervous system, we're going to have ganglia is plural. Ganglion, I-O-N, is singular. Ganglia are referring to clusters. That's a cluster. Neuron cell body. Cell body, remember, is another name for soma. So I mentioned the peripheral nervous system, and I said we should think about its job as primarily transmission. But here we see that there are these clusters of cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system. So that does mean some processing is going to occur in the peripheral nervous system. That is the significance of the ganglia. So that is really important. And then when we talk about the nerve is a bundle of axons. And so we've already sort of talked about the nerve as this transmission structure for the nervous system. All right, let's stop here. We're going to pick up more details in the next video. Stay tuned. Take care of yourselves and each other.